So what if a single choice from the very dawn of time wasn't just a one-off event? What if it's been presented to humanity over and over and over again? Well, that's the core idea we're digging into today, a pattern that, according to our source, connects the first humans all the way to what it calls the final days. Okay, so let's get right into it. The source material here isn't talking about two literal trees in a garden. Instead, it sees them as these huge, timeless symbols for a really fundamental spiritual choice. The tree of life, that's about choosing obedience and accepting the Son, who the source identifies as Jesus. And the tree of knowledge, well, that's the opposite. It's about disobedience and rejection. It's a framework for a decision that just keeps showing up.
All right, here's the game plan. We're going to trace this one idea all the way from the beginning. We'll see how it pops up in the Old Testament, how everything pivots with the arrival of the Son, how it keeps going through the history of the church, and finally, what the source says is the ultimate final version of this choice.
Okay, let's get into the Old Testament. The argument here is that this choice wasn't a one-and-done deal for Adam and Eve. No way. It just kept reappearing, in different packaging, but it was the same fundamental test for some of the biggest names in the Old Testament. You can really see the progression here, from Adam, the first man, all the way to prophets in exile like Daniel. For each one, the situation was totally different, right? Saving a world from a flood, building a nation from scratch, defending your faith when you're a captive. But the underlying choice, the source argues, was exactly the same. Let's zoom in on Noah's time. For him, the choice was basically framed as a clash between spiritual purity and a world that was just spiraling into total corruption. And what's so interesting here is how direct the comparison is. The tree of knowledge, the path of disobedience, is shown as choosing worldly desires, the daughters of men being a symbol for that corruption. The tree of life, on the other hand, was this single, kind of crazy-sounding instruction: build a giant boat. And this verse just nails it, doesn't it? This was the command. This was the specific action that represented the tree of life for Noah. It was a huge act of faith, especially when the rest of the world had completely chosen another path. Okay, so a few generations later, the choice shifts a little. It's not so much about personal purity anymore, but more about this idea of collective human pride versus individual faith. So the source draws this amazing contrast. On one side, the tree of knowledge is the Tower of Babel, all of humanity getting together to build their own way to heaven. Total pride. On the other side, the tree of life is the humility of just one guy, Abraham, being told to leave everything behind based only on a promise. And this is what's presented as Abraham's tree of life moment. It's not some complicated rule book. It's a simple, life-changing command to obey and trust. Pretty straightforward. All right, let's jump way forward now, centuries later, to the Babylonian exile. Here, the choice becomes super public. We're talking about national law versus your personal beliefs. I mean, you can't get much clearer than this. The choice for Daniel's friends was literally life and death. The tree of knowledge was to just go with the flow, bow to the big golden statue, and live. The tree of life was to refuse to stand by their faith and face a fiery furnace. The stakes just don't get any higher. So you see this pattern, right? Arcs, journeys, statues. According to the source, this was all pointing to something, or more accurately, to someone. This whole symbolic system was about to become very, very real. And this is where everything changes. With the arrival of Jesus, the source says the choice is no longer about a boat, or a journey, or a statue. It's direct. It's personal. The tree of knowledge is to reject him. The tree of life is to believe in him and accept him. And this verse right here is presented as the definitive link. It spells it out. Believing in the Son gets you eternal life, which is, the ultimate fruit of the tree of life. The abstract symbol becomes a concrete promise. But hold on. The story doesn't stop there. Not even close. The source material argues that the 7 churches in the book of Revelation aren't just 7 old congregations. It sees them as 7 distinct eras of the church, and guess what? Each one gets its own version of the choice between the 2 trees. So for that very first church, the one in Ephesus, the test was all internal. It was about holding on to the passion and the purity of their original faith and fighting against just getting comfortable and going through the motions. So for them, the choice was a battle against apathy. The tree of knowledge wasn't some big external evil. It was losing their first love, getting swayed by some weird new teachings. And the tree of life? That was a call to just remember and get back to the passion they had at the start. Now, the source goes through all 7 church eras, but we're going to jump to the very last one it talks about, Laodicea. This one is described as being a rich, totally self-sufficient, and spiritually, well, lukewarm. And this whole situation sets the stage for the final test.
The symbolism here is just fascinating. The tree of knowledge is to just be lukewarm, to be spiritually apathetic, and think you've got it all figured out. The tree of life, though, is a call to action. Trade your worldly stuff for real spiritual wealth, real righteousness, and real insight, symbolized by that gold, white clothes, and eye salve.
So you've got this thread, right? It runs all the way from Adam in the garden, through Noah's flood, Abraham's journey, all the different eras of the church, and it's all building toward one final, massive, global decision.
So after all of these different versions over thousands of years of history, what does the source say is the final exam for humanity? What does the last choice between the 2 trees actually look like?
And it all boils down to this, the most black and white choice imaginable. The tree of knowledge finds its ultimate expression in receiving the mark of the beast, a symbol of loyalty to a worldly anti-God system. And on the other side, the tree of life culminates in receiving the seal of God, a symbol of divine protection and ultimate allegiance. It is the final, irreversible declaration of where you stand.
So in the end, what this explainer shows is how one ancient story from a garden is actually framed as a single question that is echoed through time. From an ark to a journey, from a statue to a person, and finally to a mark. It ultimately brings the question right to our doorstep, asking each of us to decide, which tree are we choosing from?